Chapter 6, Heliocentrism and Gravity, the Vacu-Centric Origins of Fairy Tale Spinners. Simply put, there seem to be some inconsistencies with the current explanation of our heliocentric worldview. No, heliocentric does not mean balloon-centered, but rather comes from Helios, the Greek sun god, meaning sun-centered, which you probably knew, smarty pants. If you knew that, you also knew we haven't always had a heliocentric model of the universe. In fact, if you look out over the last 5,000 or so years of history, the swath of time that we seem to know the most about 4,500 of those years were replete with cultures that believed and espoused a flat Earth cosmology, and only the last 500 or so did we convert to the heliocentric model. Flat Earth beliefs may be observed across the ancient Chinese, Chaldean, Babylonian, Egyptian, Mayan, and Toltec cosmologies, which can be traced back through time. But we're going to focus in on these last 5 centuries. In a biography called The Sleepwalkers by Arthur Koestler, he delves into the discovery process of Galileo, Kepler, and Copernicus, which demonstrated more or less how we stumbled upon the, quote, greatest discoveries of our time, end quote. It also illustrated how different worldviews occur in different ages, and how stringing them together provides a more complete view. The somnambulistic title was his way of saying, as mentioned, that we've just kind of schlepped forward, like a drunkard in an alley, tripping over each subsequent discovery. Koestler devoted a whole part of the book to point out that, and I quote, "The cosmology of a given age is not the result of a unilinear scientific development, but rather the most striking imaginative symbol of its mentality, the projection of its conflict, prejudices, and specific ways of doublethink onto the graceful sky." End quote. He also stated, quote, "Some of the greatest discoveries consist mainly in the clearing away of psychological roadblocks which obstruct the approach to reality, which is why post factum they appear so obvious," end quote. Granted, Koestler himself was convinced of the heliocentric model, though he did poke some good holes into it and was also a known investigator of coincidence. See the roots of coincidence with respect to that. One such tear in the fabric of heliocentrism was that amidst all his research on these scientists, he discovered that Copernicus's heliocentric model of the universe wasn't even heliocentric, but vacu-centric. Copernicus proposed the Earth revolved around a spot about 3 times the diameter of the Sun away from the Sun, essentially putting the center of the solar system in an empty point in space. Hence the title of the chapter, Vacu-Centric Origins. Somehow this attribution to emptiness feels utterly fitting. Koestler writes, quote, "At the beginning, Book 1, Chapter 10, Copernicus had stated, 'In the midst of all dwells the sun, sitting on the royal throne. He rules the family of planets which turn around him. We thus find in this arrangement an admirable harmony of the world,'" end quote. But in Book 3, when it comes to reconcile, that was the end quote of Copernicus, continued quote of Koestler. But in Book 3, when it comes to reconciling the doctrine with actual observation, the Earth no longer turns round the Sun, but round a point in space removed from the Sun by a distance of about 3 times the Sun's diameter. Nor do the planets revolve round the Sun, as every schoolboy believes that Copernicus taught. The planets move on epicycles of epicycles, centered on the Sun, but on the center of the Earth's orbit. There are thus 2 royal thrones, the Sun and that imaginary point in space around which the Earth moves. The year, that is, the duration of the Earth's complete revolution round the Sun, has a decisive influence on the motions of all other planets. In short, the Earth appears equal in importance in governing the solar system to the Sun itself, and in fact nearly as important as in the Aristotelian or Ptolemaic system, end quote. How about them apples? Furthermore, when he was maturing his new theoretical model of the universe, working and living in his uncle's tower in Frauenburg, Poland, Copernicus did so 50 years before Galileo invented the telescope. Thus, the theoretical heliocentric model was concocted in the mind of a man sitting at the top of a tower in Poland, which interestingly echoes the biblical account of Psalms being composed by King David in the tower presiding over the city of Jerusalem. What's more, in Copernicus's book entitled On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Bodies wasn't published till he was on his deathbed in 1543. Kessler relays that it was reported that on his deathbed Copernicus said, "Forgive me for what I have done." A Christian news rag called The Lutheran Witness, reprinted in the Literary Digest, Volume 9, October 13, 1894, published around the turn of the century in 1882, in an article entitled Religious Views of Great Scientists, says, quote, "Copernicus is the founder of our present astronomical system, but his gravestone bears the following inscription in Latin: I do not expect the favor which thou hast given to Paul, nor the grace which thou forgavest Peter, only the clemency which thou hast shown, the thief on the cross, I beseech thee to grant me." It is the author's opinion that ever since Revolutions was published, scientists have been waging a war against a geocentric universe, all in an effort to redirect our focus away from our own true divine nature at the center of God's creation as sacred beings in a most holy and unique garden. Now, at this point, what is God? Is a fair question, and in this instance, the notion of an intelligent designer seems perfectly sufficient, leaving off religious claims pertaining to such an entity, whether or not admissible. Intelligent design, to me at least, essentially means a creator. Worth noting, the Big Bang itself is a form of creationism. So about 50 years after Copernicus, along comes Galileo, who gets persecuted by the church for pointing out the moons of Jupiter, which is the first empirical evidence that everything does not go around the Earth. It is prudent to point out that all these scientists, from Copernicus to Galileo to Newton, were all 33rd degree Masons, which is a sun-worshipping cult. They worship Horus, the sun god, whom is represented through their obelisks. Note the obelisk in St. Peter's Square at the Vatican. And his father Osiris, whom is represented through Sirius, the dog star. See chapter 3. The archaic obelisk is, in some sense, the modern rocket. Perhaps the reason we've been pitched a heliocentric model is an attempt to debunk the work of our Creator. Google Richard Dawkins' opinion of God to get a read on that. With respect to what is the Creator or what is God, my feeling is we don't have to answer these huge questions. Perhaps we are unable to. And we don't need to fight with respect to heliocentrism versus geocentrism or even atheism versus theism. Instead, we can keep our mind on simpler matters and take a look at what's being taught with respect to our Earth now, here, today. For example, when we were kids, they pointed at a globe sitting on the teacher's desk and told us that's what we live on. First thing every kid asks is, why don't the people on the bottom fall off? When they tell us about this magical force called gravity, which holds everything onto the spinning Earth, which completes one rotation of an approximate speed of 1,000-mile-hour spin at the equator every 24 hours and traverses a distance of 300 million miles every 6 months in its journey around the sun at 67,000 miles per hour. Meanwhile, the children are just trying to picture all these people in ships and buildings and cars on the bottom of the globe Earth moving upside down with some sort of stickum to their souls, and it's funny. Then we went outside at recess and dug holes, and we said we were digging to China. That which was told to us at a younger age was greater than that which we could reason with the explanations as to why they were accurate. And that's how deep it went, literally. In my opinion, we shouldn't teach kids things that they cannot comprehend, as that seems to be a form of brainwashing. How could you understand something which you can't comprehend? So we get a little older in high school and we're told again that gravity has to exist to explain how people on the other side of a ball Earth wouldn't fall off. But the proof for gravity is based on work done by Albert Einstein, who wrote this paper called On the Electrodynamics of Moving Bodies, which contained his famous theory of special relativity, which essentially said the laws of physics are identical in all inertial systems, which means time dependent, and the speed of light is constant. But when they asked Nikola Tesla, a man with 111 US patents, whom invented alternating current and free energy, what he thought of Einstein's theory of special relativity, as reported in the New York Sun, July 10, 1935, Tesla called it, quote, a mass of error and deceptive ideas and opposed to common sense. So that's a serious accusation. Then again on July 11, 1935, in the New York Herald Tribune, reports Tesla called Einstein and his coterie, quote, scientific fairy tale spinning and metaphysicians rather than astronomers, end quote. So this is from the guy who invented wireless transmission of power. So meanwhile, we can't rotate the Hubble Space Telescope like 180 degrees and zoom in to show us like lowly earthly inhabitants, a 24-hour view of cars driving upside down. Now, if you want to be nitpicky, Hubble was designed for deep space viewing, so if it were possible, we would need to design another kind of telescope specifically for Earth viewing. But nobody's going to see a live stream of cars driving upside down from telescopic images in space. My contention is because there is no bottom of this quote-unquote sphere Earth, because the Earth isn't a sphere, and gravity doesn't need to exist to explain it. So now, in my astronomy class at university, I had this professor that worked on the Hubble Space Telescope. And so my question now is, like, was he just doing math in a room and only saw computer simulations of his work? Or why, when I Google Hubble Space Telescope, is it all like CGI imaging? I wish I would have asked this professor, if the Hubble can see off into the distant universe some umpteen light years across the great expanse, can it not certainly be turned 180 degrees and zoom in to show me an upside-down Buenos Aires? For that matter, it could be anywhere in the southern hemisphere, Sydney, Melbourne, whatever. Incidentally, though, Buenos Aires means fair winds. It's a nautical term, which seems fitting. If you listen to Bill Nye's explanation of why the Earth is round, he's talking about rock concerts. It sounds like he's being deliberately retarded, which reads trivializing. We're just asking for fair winds. End of chapter 6.
Plato's allegory of the cave suggests that the phenomenal life we experience with our senses is but a mere shadow, and asserts that it is the light of the noumenon, or the essence of a thing, and things in and of themselves, beyond their three-dimensional manifestation, that presents the true reality. In order to live in this world, one must first acknowledge one's own shadow to see the light, or as Dante, Virgil, and Homer would have it, one must suffer the journey through hell to appreciate the fruit of heaven. Each one of us lives in our own cave daily. We decorate the wall, we install furniture, we import entertainment. So too, we have grown and we have assembled ourselves in a similar fashion, appropriated pieces of culture and tradition as they were wired into us. In effort to see the light, one must think of what their cave looks like without anything in it. See their person as personless, and become the mountain that shelters the cave.
Chapter 7. Scientism on its heels. Bill Nye invites flat earthers to drive to the edge of the earth.